going to introduce the first four speakers on our first panel, and then we'll have at it in that order. So our first speaker is going to be Rainer Braun. Rainer is an old friend and a very important colleague. He served as co-president and then as general secretary of the International Peace Bureau, based in Berlin, for most of the past 10 years. He has decades of experience in the German and European peace movements. He was deeply involved in the Max Planck Institute's planning for the Einstein year, and he has been a leading figure in promotion of common security diplomacy with the IPB, with the Olof Palme Center in Sweden, and the International Trade Union Confederation. And I think Sean has got some copies of maybe one or two of our common security reports. Most recently, one on Indo-Pacific. Our second speaker will be Xiao Tong. To my right page here. I've been privileged to learn from Xiao in a number of webinars, and very grateful that he accepted our invitation. He is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, working for both Nuclear Policy Program and Carnegie China. He's formerly based in Beijing, and he now conducts research in Washington on strategic security issues, such as nuclear weapons policy, deterrence, arms control, proliferation, missile defense, hypersonic weapons, regional security issues in Asia Pacific, and China's security and foreign policy. Simply to say, as we move into this increasingly tense time, I think we're really fortunate to have him speaking here tonight. He is also a non-resident researcher at the Science and Global Security Program of Princeton University, an associate editor of the Journal of Science and Global Security, and it goes on and on and on. But I trust he'll tolerate my not going further in the introduction. Our third speaker will be Rami Khouri, and I have an updated. Come on. Looking for my updated. Here it is. That's not it. Anyhow, so Rami, you've got it. All right. Thank you. So Rami is another person that I've been fortunate to learn from over many years. We're pulling ourselves down here. Yeah, his bio goes on very long. I've known him as one of the leading journalists of the Middle East. He was senior editor of two newspapers in Beirut. Interesting times. And a very, very important advocate for Xiao Tong. I don't know here. Emily, Rami Khouri, got it. So a Palestinian Jordanian American analyst whose family resides in Beirut, Amman, and Nazareth. During his 55-year career in journalism, he was editor of the Jordan Times and the Daily Star newspapers. Wrote books and syndicated columns, and contributed reporting to opinion pieces in the Middle East in the Financial Times, NPR, Washington Post, Al Jazeera. You've probably heard him in some of the interviews that he's done. He founded and managed Issam Fari's Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut, where he also taught journalism and political science. Again, it goes on very long. But just to call attention to his new book with Helena Cobbin, if you want to know what's happening, you want to turn to Rami. And then our final speaker will be Jackie Cabasso. For those of you here in the United States, she basically needs no introduction, but I'll give her one anyhow. She's executive director of Western States Legal Foundation. In the 1970s, she became an active grassroots activist in California on nuclear power and nuclear weapons. She been arrested, I think, more times than I have, about 50 or so, it says. She's been continuously active in disarmament, peace, and environmental advocacy for more than 3 decades. She's traveled widely and spoken in public meetings, legislative symposia, conferences around the United States and around the world, including several today. So she's pushing on. I don't know what adrenaline she's pulling on, but I hope she's got enough of it left after today. In 1991, she was a member of the first international government delegation to go to Semipalatinsk and now then Russia, Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan. During the 1995 NPT Review Extension Conference here in New York, she was a founding member of the Abolition 2000 Global Network to Eliminate Nuclear Weapons. So we can go on for more, but I think more interested than my going on with detailed introductions, you want to hear these people. Let me also just introduce Emily Molinari, who's going to take over the chairing process for me. And just to say that I've asked her to be fierce in the time, keeping people to time. So if not that we want to cut speakers off, each of our speakers could probably give us wonderful lectures for a couple of hours, but we don't have that time tonight. So anyhow, thank you very much. And let me give the, I guess one more thing I wanted to say, yeah, you can come up here, if the speakers will come up to the table. And then simply to say, why did we do this? I mean, why are we organizing this, right? It's because the world is in crisis. The assumptions we had about the world where we live, the post-World War II order, are gone, accelerated in the last month or so by the Trump administration. We have now governments that are increasingly plutocratic, autocratic, and here in the United States, we have to work to find our way. It's going to be a challenging time, and I think, especially here in the United States, and I think one of the lessons that I've taken from people who were active in resistance to Nazi occupations in Palestine, during the war here in the Vietnam War, is the importance of solidarity, the importance of community, and the importance of just insisting on the truth. And those can be foundations for the way we make our way forward. So with that, I'm going to shut up. And Emily, if you will, I don't know where you want to sit okay, all right. Well, thank you very much. And so I give the floor to Reiner.
Dear colleagues and dear friends, it is really a pleasure to be invited again to a meeting in this house. And let me say in the beginning, I think we all are looking for a new Albert Einstein who is explaining us now the world in its changes. I'm not the new Albert Einstein, and I cannot explain the world. What I can is to give you some thoughts and ideas for discussion, above all also for controversial discussion, because the times are looking for new answers and new results. Let me start with a sentence which you maybe don't expect from someone who's working for peace. We are living in revolutionary times, not because of societal changes, but of changes in the international relations and the international power structures. The world is actually chaotic and not peaceful. West Asia, Gaza, South China Sea, and more local conflicts like Sudan and Congo are examples for that. About Ukraine, I will speak later. The war in Ukraine is for me the most significant sign for those changes, while others like Gaza and West Bank are still deep in a war situation. What are the new things in the world? And every day there are new news which shows the deep changes. The first point I would like to mention is the old US transatlantic relations with Europe and the United States are dead and will never come back, in the sense that Europe will be the junior partner or even a vassal of the United States. Now we have totally new relations, which shows that Europe is for the United States with quite no interest any longer. Second, the global South has become an important player in the international relations, above all the BRICS countries, by GDP, by population, by economic development, and by political actions they are doing. Peace in the world today is impossible without the global South and the BRICS country. Main role is playing China, but also Russia and India. And the new kind of politics between these independent sovereign countries, accepting their differences and looking for common points and actions in all fields of policy, including finances and technology. Third, Europe is not any longer of interest. It is in reality not important. It is the western end of Asia. Because of the economy, of the deindustrialization in the main European countries, because of the war politics which isolated Europe from the rest of the world, because of national differences and fights. Great Britain was leaving the European Union. France and Germany are fighting about the hegemony in Europe. Because of the war monsters in the East and in the Baltic countries. They are militarily not important. They are not a factor. And from the technology point of view, they are in the best sense second class or the second league in the soccer league. Fourth, the new role of the United States. The hegemon will try to be a hegemon where he can. He will dominate where he can. Panama, Greenland, South America are examples for that. But he's accepted that his dominance in the world is over. He's keeping economically down in relation to other competition partners and competition opposition partners. But, and this is the difference to Europe, the United States and Trump is accepting parts of the reality of the international exchanges. He is accepting that we are living in a multipolar world, and he's trying to develop this multipolar world to a confrontational multipolar world where he can win and where he can be the first when he can, but he also accepts when he must accept partners on quite the same level. And this is the next difference to Europe. He knows when a war is lost. This has a great tradition in the United States. They know that they lost the Vietnam War. They know that they lost the Afghanistan War. They know that they lost the Iraq War. And they were accepting, without mentioning it, but in reality, they were accepting these lost. And they're changing their strategy under the new conditions to be, again, a very important, even a hegemon partner. And now to accept the loss of the Ukrainian war, to concentrate the forces on the main strategic challenge they have. This is China. And this brings me to Ukraine. After 3 years, it is obviously that the NATO countries and Ukraine is losing the war. The main reason is that the Ukrainian army is at the end. The people which are leaving the army are thousands. The young generation, which should go to the army, will not go to the army because they know that there is quite no chance for surviving. The personal reserves of the country are at the end. And what are the consequences of these? The consequences could be two. One consequence could be to stop the war so quick as possible, to avoid more victims, more killing, more destroying the country. That is the way Trump is going. The other consequences could be to believe that by sending more weapons, more support, they could win the war. That is what the Europeans are doing. This is like an alcoholic drinker, and you believe that he will come without alcohol when you give him more alcohol. It will not work. And now, in the last days, or even today, the Europeans are believing that they can win the war even without the United States. What an illusion. They could not win the war with the United States. And now they're believing they can win the war without the United States. But this is European politics, building on illusions and not on reality. And the main point of the Europeans and the United States for this war was not that the Ukraine should win the war. And when you read the big article in Time on the January the 25th, Ukraine under Biden, it was not the result should not that Ukraine win the war. The main point was that they weakened Russia, that they maybe like German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock was saying, to destroy Russia. But this has not happened. Definitely Russia had many problems, but they survived. And they are on the way to win the war. I'm not speaking about winning or losing the war. I'm only speaking about peace. And everything which just brings nearer to peace is important. That is why I'm supporting the suggestion of Trump, because it brings us nearer to peace and avoid the danger of a third world war, which was in the escalation dynamics of the last months in the last year. So peace must and will include Russia, independently who is the leader of this biggest country in the world. And any demonization or creation of enemy pictures will avoid a critical view and discussions about Russia and the authoritarian government in Russia. What we need is a real discussion about Russia accepting Russia as an important partner in the world. This makes sense. And let me say one sentence to the point. When Ukraine is lost, the Baltic countries will be the next, then Poland, and then the Russian tanks will be in the garden of the poor Germans. I quote a report from the DNI, I think you all know this. The 17 intelligence services made a common report about Russia. And now the quote, Russia almost certainly does not want a direct military conflict with the United States and NATO forces, and will continue asymmetric activities below what is calculated to be the threshold of military conflict globally. There will be no attack of Russia. And have a look to the published figure by CIPRI. By the armies, you have 3-1 between NATO and Russia. The NATO armies are 3 times bigger than the Russian army. By tanks, we have 5-1. By airplanes, 7-1. By ships, depending on what ships you take, between 2 and 4-1. In all military equipments, Russia is less big than the forces of NATO. I'm not speaking about the technological advancement. Some of the tanks of Russia are even from the 60s. They have high developed military equipment, but not very much. So together, European Union and NATO could not win the war, but a ceasefire and the negotiations are possible. And then many people are saying, oh, we need a solution, a general solution. Yes, it would be great to have a general solution. But for me, even a frozen conflict is better than war. Even a frozen conflict which stopped the daily killing is better than nothing. And then people are saying, yeah, look to Korea. Yeah, I'm saying, yes, look to Korea. For more than 50 years, they are without war. And that is better than to kill each other day to day and to have always the danger of the escalation to the way of a nuclear war, which is destroying the whole planet. And I have not to tell you how many nuclear weapons we have on all sides. So consequences of all of this for me is Europe is not any longer considered in a geopolitical strategy. Europe is in the Ukrainian war only asked as a payment machine. And that is what Trump needs Europe. And when he said Europe can come to the table, yes, Europe can come to the table when the problem of the peace is solved, and then they can pay for that. Europe can play a role only when it comes back to a politics where it was absolutely successful, the politics of common security. Develop again a common new peace architecture for Europe, including Russia, and on the basis of this, of the common agreement with Russia on political, economically, social, ecological, human beings agreements, they can play again a very important role. And this includes today for me that a peace architecture in Europe includes and must include the neighbor countries in Asia, which are more and more a very important role in the peace architecture. So I'm speaking about a new European Asian peace architecture which must be developed. And that is the chance for another way to go. And I'm speaking longer than 12 minutes, so I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rainer. Thank you so much. Just to remind everyone that we will open the Q&A afterwards, but please take notes of your questions for our speakers. And I also wanted to add just how grateful we are for all the work that Joseph Gerson put together for this event. So I was just going to ask you a round of applause for him as well. Thank you so much. And thank you, Joseph, really for everything. And now we can move on with our second speaker, Tong Zhao, if you want to continue. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. I will try to share my thoughts on the increasing challenge of maintaining a stable nuclear relationship among the three major nuclear powers, US, Russia, and China. But more importantly, I want to discuss how our community, the community that wants to promote peace and disarmament, what we can actually do to contribute to reduce the nuclear risk. I think the current situation among the three nuclear powers, especially from the perspectives of the US here, is the threat is unprecedented, right? The Russian nuclear capability is still very strong, and Russia reportedly increasingly relies on, practical nuclear weapons, nuclear coercion in a conventional war, to achieve broader military and geopolitical benefits. And China is in the process of a historical nuclear buildup. For decades, China maintained a rather small nuclear arsenal of about 200 nuclear warheads. Today, the US government assesses China to possess more than 600 nuclear weapons. And that number, has grown from 200 to 600 only within about 5 or 6 years. And the trend is likely to continue. China might reach 1,000 nuclear weapons by 2030. And from the American perspective, that's an unprecedented situation. US is facing 2 nuclear near peers for the first time in history. And that creates some, new security challenges. For example, if, we don't need to discuss the most extreme scenario of a coordinated nuclear war between Russia and China against the United States. But even in a less extreme scenario, if there is already a conventional war in Europe that stretches the American conventional forces very thin, and then there is another conventional war in the Asia Pacific between US and China, the US wouldn't have enough conventional capabilities to deal with China. And in that scenario, the United States feels it would have to rely more on nuclear weapons. So, of course, people can argue, well, you don't have to, defend the current security situation. You don't have to defend Taiwan, but it's basically a moral choice. Yes, you can let Taiwan to be taken. You can, allow the democracy to be replaced by a non-democratic system. You can allow people's current way of life to be coercively changed. For some people, that's, a very small cost compared with a military conflict. But for other people, democracy, their current way of living is worth fighting for, right? So it's a moral choice. And it's not that easy to argue. United States, it's definitely, should just give up on Taiwan and allow China to take over. And for the United States, indeed, many, security strategists are increasingly frustrated, right? They try to reach out to China, and they try to propose arms control talks, military transparency, confidence building measures, risk reduction policies, but there's basically very little response from Beijing. And as a result, the US is becoming increasingly frustrated with the lack of capability to start a serious discussion on arms control issues. And as a result, we see increasing internal consensus in Washington that given the situation, given the practical security challenge and lack of traction on arms control talk, the US has to try to counter that threat by increasing American nuclear and conventional capability. So the risk of arms race at both conventional and nuclear level is very real. And unfortunately, for the security policymakers, they largely dismiss the arguments and the advocacy of the peace community, who try to promote nuclear disarmament, etc. Because our arguments are viewed as not trying to address the practical security challenges facing us today, and therefore, we easily lose our relevance and influence in the a serious policy debate. So can we, or how we address the practical security challenges? Well, try to promote a peace through cooperative security, through arms control and disarmament. I think that's the key question. And if we look at the current round of nuclear arms race. I think China's nuclear buildup, which started, sometime during the 2010s, is an important driver. But why is China building up? Right? I think, I did some research into, the currently available resources. It looks like the current Chinese nuclear buildup is not directly driven by concerns about American nuclear policy per se, because the US nuclear capability for the last few decades has been decreasing as a result of bilateral US-Russian nuclear arms control agreement. But rather, the Chinese nuclear buildup is very driven by, a political level concern about the strategic hostility from the United States and the US-led Western countries towards China. And the Chinese threat perception is very, genuine, is very deep. But that threat perception is a result of broader disagreements over core issues in the bilateral relationship: Taiwan, human rights, Hong Kong, Uyghurs in Xinjiang, China's domestic suppression, China's, regional behavior, etc. They disagree across the board on those core issues. So there's a strong political element in China's threat perception, and that's a more important driver of China's nuclear buildup, because the current Chinese leadership apparently believes that a bigger nuclear arsenal could somehow give China broader coercive leverage in the bilateral relationship. And President Xi Jinping made a very, direct reference to Russia by praising Russia's policy of maintaining a big nuclear arsenal. And he implied that, Russia's large nuclear arsenal somehow made Western countries deal with Russia more carefully, right? So similarly, the argument runs a bigger Chinese nuclear arsenal would somehow soften American overall approach towards China. So it's not about nuclear weapons per se, it's about the broader bilateral relationship. And similarly, we have seen Russia basically making the same argument, right? Russia refused to talk about arms control issues when the broader bilateral political problems are unresolved, right? Russia is making a direct linkage between a bilateral nuclear discussion with the broader bilateral political relationship. So basically, we need to address the underlying rivalry among the major powers. And we need to address the key, political disagreements over core issues. And I think there are things that still can be done, right? Like the core challenge over Taiwan, the political disagreement over Taiwan very much results from divergent views on the legal basis behind the Taiwan issue. The Chinese, they believe that they have 100% legal right according to current international law. They have 100% right to use force to change territorial status quo. They believe that this is backed by current norm. This is consistent with international behavior. But I'm not sure that perception is 100% accurate. But that also means there is opportunity that we can have actually a broader international discussion about the underlying political, legal, and normative dimensions of these core challenges. And this is what the peace community should actually focus on. And by addressing these underlying challenges, we can turn a military problem into a legal discussion, a normative discussion. That's where the international community can really help. Secondly, the second driver of the current arms race is the increasing lack of internal accountability. in security policy making. Again, using China as an example, the reason China has this large nuclear build-up program is because the current political leader believes that China should have a larger nuclear arsenal. But this underlying belief that a larger nuclear arsenal could translate into broader coercive leverage, it could somehow stabilize China-US relationship. That logic is never thoroughly scrutinized by Chinese expert community. And in fact, even today, many China's leading nuclear policy experts, they still struggle to really understand the military rationale behind the need for large nuclear arsenal. They genuinely don't understand why China needs a larger nuclear arsenal, because it is driven by a very ambiguous logic, right? That may not be true if we test it against empirical experience. So the lack of accountability, the fact that the political leadership's vision can be so easily translated into practical policy because the internal system in China has become more centralized over time. The military, has growing influence. The traditional expert community is increasingly marginalized, is losing influence in internal policy deliberation. That's a key contributor to the Chinese nuclear buildup. And unfortunately, the similar situation is happening here, right? Under President Trump, he demands political loyalty over anything else. And we do see that influences everyone's incentive structure, right? Senior officials, senior advisors increasingly prioritize demonstrating loyalty to President Trump rather than scrutinizing, practical policy assumptions. So I also see an increasing risk that US domestic nuclear policy making is becoming less and less accountable. The risk of making bad decisions is growing. So looking at the peace community, I think we haven't really done enough to try to bridge the internal divisions. We are very enthusiastic to try to promote talks between US and its undemocratic rivals, China, North Korea, Russia. But we seem to have lost confidence and interest in talking with our democratic countrymen on the other side of the aisle. Right? We don't think we can bridge the internal division. And we somehow seem to believe we can bridge the division with, undemocratic partners. That's really, something to consider. I think especially in democracies, the room for a civil discussion to contain, to mitigate internal division is truly important to increase internal accountability. So let me just, conclude by summarizing the two main points I want to convey today. One is, for the peace community, I think we should focus much more on addressing the underlying rivalry among the major nuclear powers by working on the key political disagreements among them, and to start a legal and normative discussion around those core disputes. And secondly, I think we should work much more on bridging internal division and enhancing internal accountability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for coming, and thanks to the organizers for doing this. So if I have 10 minutes, so if one of you would give me a signal when I hit 9, so I can try to, it's hard to say much in 10 minutes when dealing with these big sticker items, but I'll give you the overview of what I see is going on in the Middle East. And I'm talking mostly about the Arab countries, but also Iran, Israel, and Turkey play into this very much. The Middle East is important when you're talking about the future peace and trying to prevent nuclear war, nuclear proliferation, because it's the most volatile and dangerous region in the entire world. It has been at war for about a century internally among different people in the region. Before there were these countries today, after these countries were established 100 years ago, it's been at war with foreign powers. We've had 250 years of mostly European colonialism and imperialism. The United States joined the process a little bit later. But we've had foreign militaries not just coming to the region, but actually engaged in warfare, attacking people in the Arab Middle East region since Napoleon in 1789. That's a long time, and they haven't stopped. And they're increasing the foreign military activism. If you look at the United States, United Kingdom, Russia, and now Iran is involved. Turkey is more involved. I'm talking about non-Arab powers, but so there's more people who are coming to the region or in the region who are involved in military actions within the region. And the nuclear issue is not so critical right now. Only Israel has nuclear weapons. But there are many candidates who want to get nuclear weapons. Iran, Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia are the most prominent ones. And there's always the danger that Israel might use a nuclear weapon. They loaded them up on airplanes and jet fighters in 1973 when they thought they were cornered. But then the United States, as usual, came to their aid. And we don't want anybody fighting wars. We don't want anybody feeling they're going to be destroyed. And this should never happen. But it has happened, and it's gone on for over 2 centuries. And it needs to be addressed in a more complete way because the trends are getting worse, not better. It's critical to look at security, peace, stability, development, and any other goals like that. It's absolutely critical to understand why we got to the situation that we're in. And the situation we're in is one that is not at all well reported in the international media. So most people around the world, including many of you in this room, if you don't actively follow the Middle East or the Arab region, you probably wouldn't know the actual realities. But the realities are bad and getting worse, steadily worsening. The key ones I'll mention, I can just give you headlines. First is the brittle condition of most of the Arab countries. When I say brittle, I mean some of them are shaking at the edges, some of them have fallen apart. Many of them have split up. If you look at countries like Sudan or Yemen or Libya or others, you see parts of the country splits off, and Iraq and others. So these are not structurally solid countries. They're brittle, and they struggle. All of the Arab countries, with no exceptions, including the very rich small oil countries that don't have so much material problem like healthcare or jobs, because they're small population, a lot of money, and they spend it on their people. But the vast majority of the Arab countries all face problems, have problems addressing the 5 critical challenges that face them. These are the challenges of statehood, having stable, structurally sound, and well-functioning states. The second one is citizenship. These are countries in which the ordinary citizen has very little, if any, real political power, either for participation in formulating policies or in holding power accountable, whether it's national power, foreign power, economic powers, whatever it may be. So citizenship is number 2. Number 3 is human development. The human development trend is pretty bad. It was actually much better in the 60s and 70s when there was a surge of development in the region, but it's gone down. And I'll give you a couple of figures in a minute. But human development, education, healthcare, nutrition, housing, jobs, all of these issues, the problems are severe, and most Arab countries are not meeting that challenge. The fourth one is security, fundamental security, either because of internal tensions and fighting and dangers, terrorism, criminality, whatever, gangsters, all kinds of, or security from foreign invasions and wars, regional wars. At all levels, the security problems of the region are significant and mostly worsening. And the fifth one is sovereignty. The 22 Arab states are independent, but they're not really fully sovereign. Most Arab countries, if they want to make a real important sovereign decision, like which fighter jets should we buy, or with whom should we make a free trade agreement, or something really serious, they usually need to get either the formal approval or a nod and a wink from some foreign power that is their patron, their protector, their funder, their armorer, some foreign country that could be another Arab country in some cases. But so they don't have real sovereignty. So these 5 issues are the core underlying stresses: stable statehood, citizenship, human development, security, and sovereignty. I want to mention only the issue of the human needs of the region. The reason this region is so full of conflicts, terrorism, illegal migration, drug production and export, all the terrible things that we see. This is not the only thing that happens. This is a region full of wonderful people and culture and stable families. And anyone who knows the Middle East knows the good things. I'm only mentioning the macro picture, bad issues, and the stresses that create the conflicts that we see erupting in the news. But the real issue is the quality of life, the fundamental well-being and rights of the citizens. There's around 440 million Arabs today. Now, as I said, Turkey, Israel, and Iran are different. They have different conditions, different challenges, but I'm talking mainly of the Arab countries. And the 440 million Arabs, the United Nations ESCWA, Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, which produces wonderful studies on the region, they just issued a report last week saying that of the 440 million Arabs, 187, about 190, just under half of them are vulnerable and or marginalized. And this is only measuring the social needs, the material needs, education, water, healthcare. A bigger number, 292 million out of the 440 million Arabs, lack some or much social protection, health insurance, labor laws, pension funds, things of that nature. I mean, these are massive numbers. And then you get into this is just social deprivation. If you look at the figures of poverty, you get to the worst situation where about 69 to 70%, over 2/3 of all Arab families are needy. They don't have enough money for their monthly basic food, electricity, etc. And when you go to the less developed countries like Yemen or Sudan or others, it gets up to 85 or 90%. So this is a terrible situation at the human and societal level, which impacts on the stability of the state, which impacts on warfare. So the last point I would make in my last minute is that these conditions are the basic reason why this is a region that has been at war for the last 100 years. And the central driver of this process, in my view, has been the direct or indirect impact of the Arab-Israeli conflict, which is directly linked to European colonial imperialism in the beginning to help create the state of Israel. I'm not saying the state of Israel shouldn't exist. It does exist, and all the Arabs say they want to recognize it, but it has not allowed a Palestinian state to exist, which should exist. And so this solving the Arab-Israeli conflict would be the single biggest contribution to stability throughout the region and would reduce the issues, for instance, the conflict between Israel and Iran and the fear of Iran developing nuclear weapons. So the Arab-Israeli conflict has to be seen as the priority issue, which the Israelis and the United States refuse to acknowledge. And this leads to the last point, which is that what is actually going on, I believe, having lived in the region for 50 years and watched this close up, and I know Israel well, and I know the Arab region, and I've been to all the countries. What we're witnessing today with the Gaza war, which the UN has called a plausible genocide, we're witnessing the last anti-colonial struggle in the world. And the reason most of the global South supports equal rights for Israelis and Palestinians and ending the genocide and a permanent ceasefire is because most of the global South sees this conflict as the last anti-colonial battle. And the supporters of Israel, the US and Great Britain and others, are acting in the imperial way that they have for the last 100 or 200 years. I mean, I can't get into any more details, there's no time. But I just wanted to point out the local factors that are so powerful for creating instability and tension and anger and war, and then the external factors that are involved as well. Thank you very much.
It's a tough set of 3 acts to follow. Before I begin, as a United States citizen speaking to an international audience, I would like to issue a disclaimer. Okay, that's where I'm. As I wrote to Joseph Gerson when he invited me to speak at this forum on an overview of what to expect from Trump 2.0's nuclear policies and actions, I wrote, "You have thrown down an impossible gauntlet, but I accept the challenge." Preparing these remarks has felt impossible. Finding real information about Trump's nuclear weapons intentions has been like looking for the proverbial needle in the haystack. Only in this case, the haystack is more like a tumbleweed on fire that's being blown across the desert at high speed. Every day since their coronation, Trump and Musk have assaulted us with a tsunami of confusing, frightening, and often contradictory rhetoric on their social media platforms, accompanied by a blizzard of legally questionable, to be polite, executive orders. Very few of the rants or executive orders mention nuclear weapons. At the same time, it has never seemed more important to locate nuclear weapons within the plethora of other foreign policy issues that are taking center stage, which I certainly can't do in 10 minutes. So I'm very grateful that Rainer Braun, Tang Zhao, Rami Khoury have provided that context. Some have attached significance to Trump's casual remarks at a February 13th press conference, where he said he would like to lead changes in military spending and denuclearization with China and Russia. Quote, "There's no reason for us to be building brand new nuclear weapons. We already have so many you could destroy the world 50 times over, 100 times over. And here we are building new nuclear weapons. And they're building new nuclear weapons, and China's trying to catch up." But he said those conversations would only happen when things calm down a bit. However, it is well documented that Donald Trump is a pathological liar, as well as an unhinged, delusional, narcissistic, racist, fascist, xenophobic, transphobic, unprincipled misogynist. I've even seen it said that he doesn't know when he's lying. Remember that it was Trump during his first term who pulled the US out of the Iran nuclear deal. On February 4th of this year, Trump signed a national security presidential memorandum, quote, "restoring maximum pressure on the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran, denying Iran all paths to a nuclear weapon, and countering Iran's malign influence abroad." Upon signing, Trump said that he wants to work out a deal with Iran so that everyone can live together. But when asked about an alleged plot by Iranian proxies to assassinate him, Trump responded, quote, "That would be a very terrible thing for them to do. Not because of me. If they did that, they would be obliterated. That would be the end. I've left instructions. If they do it, they get obliterated. There won't be anything left," end quote. This ominous threat reverberates with Trump's terrifying 2017 warning that if North Korea made any more threats to the United States, quote, "they will be met with fire, fury, and frankly power, the likes of which this world has never seen before." Remember, too, that as the number of ratifications of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons neared the 50 that would trigger its entry into force, in October 2020, under Trump's leadership, the United States sent a letter to the 47 countries that had at that time ratified the treaty, urging them to withdraw their support. Trump and Musk are gleefully and systematically gutting the diplomatic corps and senior level military officials whose expertise would likely be essential to negotiate complex arms control agreements with Russia and China. Disarmament is not like turning off a light switch. We cannot allow ourselves to be distracted by what Trump says, but rather look at what he and his minions do. So what do we know? U.S. national security policy has been remarkably consistent in the post-World War II and post-Cold War eras. Deterrence, the threatened use of nuclear weapons, has been reaffirmed as the cornerstone of U.S. national security policy by every president, Republican or Democrat, since 1945, when President Harry Truman, a Democrat, oversaw the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Let's look at the nuclear weapons portfolio that the Trump 2.0 regime inherited from the Biden administration. In August 2024, the New York Times reported on an initiative by the Biden administration to beef up the U.S. nuclear arsenal. As reported by the Times, in March of 2024, just last year, President Biden approved a highly classified nuclear employments guidance plan that seeks to prepare the United States for possible coordinated nuclear challenges from China, Russia, and North Korea. This came as the Pentagon believes China's nuclear arsenal will rival the size and diversity of the US's and Russia's over the next decade. This plan was hinted at by Vipin Narang, a top Department of Defense nuclear policy official, who in August 2024 stated that while current modernization plans, estimated to cost at least $350 billion over the next 2 decades, are necessary, they may well be insufficient to meet current and future threats. According to Narang, in the face of growing threats from Russia, China, and North Korea, quote, "We have begun exploring options to increase future launcher capacity or additional deployed warheads on the land, sea, and air legs that could offer national leadership increased flexibility if desired and executed." According to the then head of the National Nuclear Security Administration, Jill Ruby, the U.S. is launching a new nuclear arms race to catch up with and outsmart Russia and China. Quote, "We now have 7 systems that should be developed and put into production by the mid-2030s. This program is not only a major modernization of all 3 components of the nuclear triad, but also adds new deterrence capabilities that do not currently exist," end quote. President Biden signed an $850 billion defense authorization bill for fiscal year 2025 on December 23rd of 2024. The bill directs the Pentagon to provide Congress with, quote, "an assessment of the quantities and types of forces necessary to hold at risk all the targets defined in the Biden administration's nuclear weapons employment guidance, taking into account, quote, the planned growth in potential target quantities due to the expansion and diversification of likely adversary capabilities over the next 10 years. The Trump 2.0 regime's likely nuclear policy is spelled out in a manifesto by Project 2025, a coalition of far-right groups led by the Heritage Foundation. Its 900-page book, called Mandate for Leadership, is a blueprint for the most dramatic takeover and transformation of U.S. democracy in history and is widely seen as the playbook for the second Trump administration. Speaking at a 2022 Heritage Foundation event, Trump declared, quote, "This is a great group, and they're going to lay the groundwork and detail plans for exactly what our movement will do and what your movement will do when the American people give us the colossal mandate to save America, and that's coming," end quote. Trump's blitzkrieg of executive orders to slash the size of the federal government aligns closely with Project 2025's recommendations. Russell Vogt, one of the architects and co-authors of Project 2025, is now the director of the powerful Office of Management and Budget. In Project 2025, Vogt wrote that the Office of Management and Budget, quote, "is a president's air traffic control system," end quote, and that, quote, "the director must view his job as the best, most comprehensive approximation of the president's mind." Project 2025 proposes that a second Trump administration prioritize nuclear weapons programs over other security programs, accelerate the development and production of all nuclear weapons programs, increase funding for the development and production of new and modernized nuclear warheads, and even prepare to test new nuclear weapons. Separately, Robert O'Brien, an ex-advisor to Trump the first time around, has written that in order to counter China and Russia's continued investments in their nuclear arsenals, the US should resume nuclear testing. In a wildly misleading February 19th article titled, quote, "Trump administration orders Pentagon to plan for sweeping budget cuts," the Washington Post reported that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth had ordered senior leaders throughout the US military to develop plans for cutting 8% from the defense budget in each of the next 5 years. I beg your indulgence for another minute or two. It turns out this isn't true. Hegseth didn't order any cuts. His order just shifted funding from non-lethal programs to Trump priorities, including nuclear weapons modernization. At the end of January, Trump issued an executive order titled Iron Dome for America, requiring the Pentagon to develop a plan for a hugely ambitious and expensive multi-layered homeland missile defense system underpinned by both space-based sensors and interceptors. Among other things, the order calls for development and deployment of proliferated space-based interceptors stationed in orbit that can defeat ballistic missiles during the boost stage of flight. It's the centerpiece of Reagan's Star Wars budget project. Worth noting, the order states that even with this overwhelming missile defense capability in place, quote, "the United States will guarantee its secure second strike capability." Trump's Iron Dome project could be the subject of an entire seminar, but I'll point out just two things. One is the Musk connection. The cost of putting satellites on orbit has reduced drastically in recent years, largely due to advancements made by Elon Musk's SpaceX business. Other tech giants, including Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Dell, IBM, Hewlett-Packard, and even Facebook, have skin in the game as well. The other is that history has shown that development of missile defenses has stimulated adversaries to seek ways to penetrate them, a factor driving new arms racing. I'll just summarize my last point, which is that, like everything else, the federal budget process is in chaos. Both the House and the Senate have passed resolutions. The House version calls for an increase of $100 billion in military spending over the next 10 years. The Senate version calls for an increase of $150 billion. And it looks like they're not going to be able to agree, and that the Trump administration wants what's called a continuing resolution to maintain the 2024 budget with approved changes called anomalies to go through September of 2025. And those anomalies include a $185 million increase in nuclear weapons spending. That increase would be taken away from non-proliferation funding. So I have a little more, but I leave you to draw your own conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you once again to our brilliant speakers. We have about 10, if we want to stretch it 15 minutes for some questions. Just to let you know, we will have a little break afterwards, about 10 minutes, and then we'll continue with another panel, so don't leave. But I would like to open now the floor to the questions from the audience. Yeah, we have one here.
Jackie, your conclusions, please.
Mike, I said draw your own conclusions. Mike, no,
I don't
summed
think
up
it's
the budget
working.
stuff and then I said draw your own conclusions.
Okay, yeah, I did.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we can understand the corporate oligarchic capitalist rationale for the United States and Russia to expand defense spending and the nuclear arsenal, but why China?
It should work also, that one, if you want to try.
As I said, this came from the current political leadership's intuitive belief that given the increasing strategic rivalry between US and China, a bigger Chinese nuclear arsenal could give China broader coercive leverage. Right? And that belief is no longer scrutinized. That logic is, the experts are no longer able to debate and discuss the underlying logic. And therefore, the leadership's intuitive belief easily became practical policy.
Reiner, you said with some conviction that there was no way that Ukraine could win the war with European support. They couldn't even win it with American support. And then you went on to list the extraordinary conventional superiority of European forces over Russian forces in terms of numbers of troops, ships, planes, tanks, and technology. There seems to be sort of a contradiction there. Could you explain why it is that with this enormous conventional superiority, Europe could not win a war against Russia and Ukraine?
I think the main reason for all the militarization of Europe is the belief that they can at the end win the fight against Russia by developing the militarization of Europe. And that Europe could become again a very important player in the world by militarization of their countries. That is the belief. For me, it's an illusion, but that is the belief in the political classes in Europe that they could become an important partner, because you have the tendency of enlarging the military budget in all European countries. And all European countries are suffering under the social conditions. So this is a contradiction in the different countries. But up to now, the elites believe that the militarization, they can play an important part in the world and in the changes of the world situation now.
Yes, hi, Sean Connor from the International Peace Bureau. Tongzhou, thank you very much, excuse me, for your contribution. I particularly liked how you said, we cannot expect to resolve the issues between countries when we can't even resolve the issues within our own countries or within the political parties in the US, for example. I'm wondering if you see perhaps, and this can extend to any of the panelists that may want to comment on this, is there a role then for people-to-people connections in resolving our issues? Is there a way that by connecting members of civil society, not governments, to discuss our issues, could this contribute to a resolution? Thank you.
Thank you. And I think there are a lot of efforts in the peace community here to provide a different perspective, right? We believe in disarmament, we believe in cooperative security. But what I think is lacking is the belief in our capability to actually engage in substantive debates with the other side, right? We totally dismiss their logic, their concern, right? We don't think it's even possible. We can try to reach a meaningful agreement on substantive issues, and therefore I think our that doesn't contribute as much really to bridging the internal division. And that somehow I think also led to the lack of influence of our voices in the policymaking circle today. Whether I think there is there's asymmetric situation here on the other side of the aisle. People who believe in greater deterrence capability to counter practical threats. Maybe I'm not well informed, but I don't see them having a strong civil society voice and movement. Whereas on the peace movement side, we have a lot of people working hard to promote our voices. So maybe we just need to, from my personal perspective, try to engage more on the substantive arguments, right? On the, at least propose our own ideas of how to address the practical security challenges facing the world today. I don't think it's easy to just, to reach, conclusion that, we can't just give up Taiwan or, Ukraine. It doesn't, worth a fight. I think, again, it's a tough moral choice because people's real lives will be lost when you make that choice. So, try to not dismiss the other substantive concerns and engage with those. I think really help elevate our influences. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, we have some online questions. Yes. We have a question, maybe at large for the panel. How could we facilitate America first or China first or Russia first for a trilateral arms control reduction agreement? Are there any roles for the non-nuclear weapon states under the nuclear umbrella, like Japan, for further strategic stability, nuclear disarmament, and control?
Well, I'll try. In theory, yes. In current reality, I don't think so. And I want to come back to Sean's question a little bit, because I think that at least where we are in the United States, and from what I know of a lot of the other countries who are represented here, we need to fundamentally rebuild a movement from the bottom up, and it's got to be a multi-issue movement. And our first task here, I'm talking about this country, is to provide mutual aid and support for those who are in the front lines of being attacked, like immigrants, for example. We need to, we need to be agile and flexible, and we need to go where we're needed to support those who are most under attack. Now, part of that is to educate those other constituencies about the real nuclear dangers they're facing, so that they will then come and support us when it comes to doing something, whatever it's going to be. I mean, we need to keep our demand clear and strong, but I'm not, as I suggested, I am not willing to align myself with Trump in any way, shape, or form in so doing. Now, I think that people to people direct contact is part of building that movement. It was a very important part of building the movement in the 80s. And it's certainly an important part of building this new movement here, and I'm sure in other places. I think that some people in other countries might like to reassure themselves about Americans by meeting people like us. So That's the best answer I can give.
I think Jackie mentioned one of the most important points. This is the point of building up the new movement. I think under the new circumstances of the world, we have a huge need to develop an international peace movement again, which is in the same way strong like it was in the 80s. And for that, we definitely need the people-to-people's contact. We need trust building between the different movements and also between the different countries. And we need first steps for disarmament and maybe for arms control. And I think we should, I was never a friend of arms control, because arms control in history always means that we go a new way for armament race. But maybe in this historical situation, arms control is a very, very important step to stop this development of even more weapons everywhere in the world. So that is for me a key player. And very important for me is that we are looking who are our new partners in the world fighting with us for the disarmament process. It is definitely not any longer a European process, also not any longer a European-US process. We have to engage the global South also in the disarmament question. And this is a key challenge, because up to now, they were staying a little bit by side. They were thinking this was the job of the first world, but this is not any longer true. So these are the challenges we are facing. And I think why it is so important, I think Jackie said everything, why it is so important that we are really continue fighting for nuclear disarmament.
Please go on.
Can I add briefly about the role of non-nuclear weapon states in holding the major powers accountable? Unfortunately, the leaders in the major powers are very disappointing. But I think there are many things the international community could do to hold their behaviors accountable. One example is even a limited nuclear exchange among the major nuclear powers would have a widespread impact on neighboring countries and regions, and nuclear fallout, etc., could bring about huge damage to other countries' environmental integrity and public health. And right now there is a UN-sponsored, there's a UN resolution that will set up an international panel of experts to study the effects of nuclear war. I think the international community could, for example, use this opportunity to use the results of such UN-sponsored study to start establishing some legal or political liability for nuclear weapon states that might initiate nuclear conflict in the future that would affect other countries, people, and environment. And to let them know that they will be held accountable, they will have to compensate, and it's not going to be cheap. So I think that's one small way to increase the bar to start a nuclear conflict, to strengthen deterrence. And this exactly, I think, our community can think more about. Thank you.
Thank you again to all the speakers. I'm afraid we need to close this panel. I just wanted to add that I think these final words about the need, once again, to keep building this international peace movement are really powerful, and they remind us that there is always hope. And I think this event is one example of this. So I'm really grateful that we are all here talking about this issue. And I think it's also a great bridge to the next panel, because we will hear directly from civil society initiatives and what they are doing both on the ground and internationally about nuclear disarmament. So once again, please stay. We will have a 10 minutes break. We will start again at 8:30. Thank you again. And just grab some water and come back. Thank you.
I'm going to turn the microphone over to my colleague here from Peace Action New York State. And away we go.
Thank you, Joseph. Can I also just remind everyone to please silence their cell phones for this next panel? Thank you so much. All right, so for this second panel, can I please have to the stage Maylene Hughes, Masako Wada-san, Idarim Setinova, and Sharon Dolev.
Yeah, I just say we really do some more. Yeah. Sure. All right. I think we'll just dive into our second panel. So please take your seat, and yeah, as Margaret was saying, please silence your cell phones and try to keep the voice volume at the minimum, because I was also told that it's kind of difficult to hear our speakers from the back. So also, if you speakers can try to speak close to the microphones. If you prefer to say sit, just say sit, or if you want to come over to the podium, feel free to do so. So our first speaker will be Maylene Hughes. She is the grassroots organizing and policy coordinator for the Nuclear Threats Program at PSR in Los Angeles. She leads the charge in organizing the Back from the Brink Coalition's Southern Californian hub. Her work extends to connecting nuclear weapons with social justice issues and emphasizing their local impact. She graduated from Occidental College with her bachelor in critical theory and social justice and a minor in politics. And we're really glad that she will speak about the Back from the Brink campaign and tell us a little bit more about this initiative. The floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody. No worries. Hey, it's confusing. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm so grateful to be here and to be speaking alongside so many amazing people. And I also just want to point out the fact that all of you in the crowd are amazing, and the work that you do is incredible, and you're very important to the movement. So please give a round of applause for yourselves. So I'm fairly new to the movement. My introduction to it was about a year and a half ago. And I just recently graduated from college in 2023. So as soon as I graduated, that was like my introduction to this space. And so today I'm here to talk about the Back from the Brink campaign. And a lot of folks, when they hear about nuclear weapons, about this issue, the first thing that runs through their mind is, okay, so what can I do about it? A lot of folks feel like there's nothing that they can really do about it because it's the government who decides these things. And they're like, how can I impact nuclear weapons policy? And so the Back from the Brink campaign was established in 2017 following the adoption of the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the reason why we're all here today. And our primary goal is to foster public demand and political will for nuclear abolition in the United States, mainly through local community-based organizing. And it was a great segue from that from the last panel, the last question talking about what we can do. And briefly, we talked a little bit about the 80s and the freeze movement when global nuclear arsenal was nearing its all-time high of 70,000 nuclear weapons. And it was here in New York, in Central Park, where over 1 million people marched as part of the freeze movement. And after the Cold War, nuclear weapons became less visible and the movement seemed to dissipate with fewer groups and individuals involved. And so our organizing model borrows a little bit from the freeze movement. in that we are working locally and getting resolutions adopted and building power from the ground up to demonstrate to leaders in Washington that their own constituents want them to take action. As a coalition of organizations, individuals, and elected officials, we advocate in the United States to spearhead negotiations among nuclear armed states. These negotiations would aim to achieve a multilateral, verifiable, and time-bound agreement to eliminate nuclear arsenals. And additionally, we promote common sense policies to prevent nuclear war. Our mission is to cultivate a visible, active, and diverse constituency for nuclear disarmament within the United States. We believe that such leadership would significantly impact the global effort to abolish nuclear weapons. And so our approach is intersectional. We find ways to connect our advocacy for nuclear abolition with other related economic, social, racial, and climate justice struggles. We feel as if the movement today is a bit siloed, and that's how it is for a lot of other movements. And so we're trying to break those barriers and show how our movements connect with one another and build relationships, foster relationships so that we can get to the end goal, which is a world with love, a world with peace, and a world without nuclear weapons. So an example of that in the past was in 1964, when Japanese atomic bomb survivors visited Harlem, advocating against nuclear proliferation as part of the Hiroshima-Nagasaki World Peace Study Mission. And while they were here, they met with Malcolm X, who drew parallels between their suffering and that of Black Americans due to racism. Civil rights leaders such as Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. believed that funds spent on nuclear weapons should be used to uplift marginalized communities. So in addition to nuclear abolition, Back from the Brink calls for a series of 5 common sense policies to reduce the risk of nuclear war. These include actively pursuing a verifiable agreement among nuclear armed states to eliminate their nuclear arsenals, renouncing the option of using nuclear weapons first, ending the sole unchecked authority of any US president to launch a nuclear attack, and taking the United States nuclear weapons off of hair trigger alert, and finally canceling the plan to replace the entire United States nuclear arsenal with enhanced weapons. So the core of Back from the Brink is community-based organizing at the local level. The campaign was created to enable anyone, individuals, organizations, or elected officials to actively participate and create significant change. We focus on local community organizing because we recognize that members of Congress whose decisions and votes influence the executive branch are more likely to respond to this issue if they hear from their constituents. The people who live and work in communities they represent and who elected them into office are the ones they will be listening to, because at the end of the day, their job depends on us. So nuclear weapons are a local issue for many reasons. Tax dollars are wasted on nuclear weapons, diverting funds from human needs. Cities are the targets, and it is within the purview of any locality to keep its community safe. Many communities have been negatively impacted by nuclear weapons production and testing, and Back from the Brink works to connect these issues to people's everyday security concerns and community needs. So I want to talk a little bit more about the ways nuclear proliferation harms marginalized and indigenous communities, and what ways nuclear weapons policies intersect with economic justice, climate change, and global inequality. So nuclear proliferation has always disproportionately harmed marginalized and indigenous communities, both in the United States and globally. From uranium mining to nuclear weapons testing, production, and waste disposal, these communities bear the brunt of environmental destruction, health consequences, and economic exploitation. And I'm going to label out briefly about how. And if we're being honest, the youth these days, these are the points that speak to their heart, that speak to their passions. These are the things that they want to hear about and that will get them involved in the movement. Because as we see today, this movement it looks as if it's aging out. I mean, a lot of folks, no offense, guys, but A lot of my peers know nothing about nuclear weapons. I didn't know anything about nuclear weapons, and I've been in the social justice space for a couple years now. And it wasn't until it was put right in front of my face that I was like, oh, this is an issue. I didn't even know what nuclear weapons were before this. All I've seen was what was depicted in movies, TVs, video games, and a brief history lesson about World War II. So there is disproportionate harm to marginalized and indigenous communities. One of these ways is uranium mining and environmental racism. Indigenous lands have been primary targets for uranium extraction, often without informed consent. The Navajo Nation, for example, still suffers from contaminated water and high cancer rates due to abandoned uranium mines. Nuclear testing fallout, the United States and other nuclear states conducted most of their nuclear tests in or near indigenous and marginalized communities. The Marshall Islands, Nevada test site affecting Shoshone and Paiute peoples, Algeria, and Kazakhstan are all examples where local populations suffered radiation exposure, birth defects, and long-term ecological damage. Another issue is nuclear waste dumping. Waste disposal sites disproportionately end up in low-income and indigenous areas, such as the Yucca Mountain on Western Shoshone land and the waste isolation pilot plant in New Mexico. This continues the cycle of environmental injustice. So when we talk about nuclear policy and economic injustice, there is a misallocation of resources. The United States alone spends over $50 billion annually on nuclear weapons instead of funding healthcare, housing, education, and climate resilience. These funds could directly address social inequalities. And then there's the issue of worker exploitation. Many nuclear workers, especially those from marginalized communities, were exposed to radiation without adequate protections. The United States government later created programs such as RECA, but many affected individuals and communities still struggle for recognition and justice. Colonial legacies, many nuclear armed nations tested weapons in colonized or occupied lands, reinforcing patterns of exploitation. The Marshallese, for example, were displaced and continue to suffer health consequences while being denied full rights in the United States. On the issue of nuclear weapons and climate change, there's the environmental devastation, nuclear testing, production, and waste disposal degrade ecosystems. They pollute water sources and make land uninhabitable. And there's the topic of nuclear energy and resource strain. The nuclear weapons complex consumes vast amounts of energy and resources that could be redirected towards sustainable solutions. So just to conclude about the disproportionate harm, nuclear abolition is a social justice issue. They are not just a security issue, but they are an issue of racial, economic, and environmental justice. And abolishing them isn't just about preventing war, it's about addressing the deep-rooted injustices that they have caused. Abolitionist movements and movements such as Back to the Brink stress that nuclear disarmament is only one component of the larger struggle for justice. So just to speak a little bit more about Back from the Brink, it was Back from the Brink established regional hubs across the United States in 2022 to decentralize its organizational structure. Back from the Brink currently has 21 official hubs around the country working to advance Back from the Brink's mission and broader nuclear disarmament goals within their communities. These hubs are local contact points for people interested in community-based or regional efforts to eliminate nuclear weapons. So these hubs are ways for individuals to get involved in their communities and find like-minded people to get involved and to actively do something to prevent nuclear war. Congressman McGovern and our team have collaborated on a follow-on resolution for House Resolution 77, which will be available soon. And this resolution mirrors local Back from the Brink resolutions, and it includes Just Transition and RECA. And this will be a valuable tool for local communities, Back from the Brink members and hubs, as well as individuals, organizational partners, and to engage with their House representatives and build local and federal leadership on this critical issue. So how can people take meaningful action for nuclear abolition? To date, over 80 United States municipalities counties, and state bodies have voted to adopt resolutions supporting our policy platform, including major cities such as Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, states of California, Oregon, and many more, and hopefully more to come. These resolutions are powerful educational and organizing tools, and they distill key problems and solutions to a series of statements that are easy to understand. And once adopted, these resolutions are used by local activists to help demonstrate to their Congress members that their constituents want them to take action towards nuclear abolition. Many communities can customize their resolution to include other local concerns or divesting from nuclear weapons producers. And so here are some ways that you can get involved with Back from the Brink. You can endorse the campaign. You can call, write, or meet with your House representative to urge them to co-sponsor the new House Resolution 77 follow-on, which does not yet have a number, but hopefully it has a number as easy to remember as 77. To organize a Back from the Brink municipal resolution effort, to co-sponsor public education events, write letters to the editor, attend local organizing meetups that Back from the Brink has on the third Tuesday of every month, follow us on social media, form or join a Back from the Brink hub, because there most likely is one in your city if you live in the United States. And if there's not, talk to us and we can find some people. Or you can also become a coalition partner for organizations. To wrap up, I just want to speak a little bit about how youth can get involved. And Back from the Brink has a partner organization, also a sister organization, I would say, with Students for Nuclear Disarmament. And S&D, like Back from the Brink, they have chapters across the United States. And they collaborate with Back from the Brink hubs in educating young folks about the threat, as well as advocating for the United States government to pursue the 5 policy points. And if you look on our website, you can find a little bit more about Nuclear Weapons 101 and how they affect how this issue is intersectional. And you can also get in touch with us if you have any youth folks or if you know any students that want to form a chapter or join Students for Nuclear Disarmament and a Back from the Brink. But thank you all so much for having me here.
Thank you so much for that, Maylene. Next, we have Masako Wada-san, who is a Japanese hibakusha. As a survivor of the 1945 atomic bombing of Nagasaki, and she's an assistant secretary general of Nihon Hidankyo, the Japan Confederation of A and H bomb sufferer organizations, which was awarded the 2024 Nobel Peace Prize this past December. A dedicated advocate for nuclear weapons abolition, she has represented and spoken on behalf of Nihon Hidankyo in countless forums across Japan, at the UN during TPNW and NPT conferences and negotiations, and she has participated in numerous speaking tours around the world. So here's Masako Wada-san.
Good evening, everybody, again. I am Masako Wada from Hidankyo. I'm very honored and deeply grateful for this, for giving me the opportunity to speak before you as a hibakusha. I'd like to share my mother's testimony just a little bit. I was 1 and 10 months old when Nagasaki was devastated by the atomic bomb. I was inside my house, located 2.9 kilometers away from the blast center. Thanks to the mountains surrounding the central part of Nagasaki City, which is northern part of Nagasaki City. So I lived in the southern part of Nagasaki City. So which somewhat shielded my my house from direct impact of the bomb. I did not suffer any burns or injuries and have survived to this day. Brigadier General Thomas Farrell, who was in charge of the Manhattan Project, arrived in Japan shortly after the atomic bombing. And at the press conference, he stated to the effect that all those who were doomed to die had died. And there was no one suffering from radiation. As a result, at the temporary relief station were closed. In Japan, a defeated nation reporting on the damage caused by the atomic bombing was severely restricted by the United States. Many people died without knowing why they were dying. The number of dead within concentric circle from the hypocenter by the end of December 1945 was estimated at 140,000 in Hiroshima and 90,000 in Nagasaki. Each with the error of margin of plus minus 10,000. 65% of them were children, women, and elderly. And only 4% of them died while being cared for by someone. Many of them were burned like garbage without being identified, who they were or where they are from. Those who were cremated by the hands of her families may have been fortunate. Survivors were never informed of the causes of their ill health and suffering. They were tormented by survivors' guilt, illness, and poverty, and had to give up many of their dreams. They are also subjected to discrimination and prejudice because of the lack of understanding in society. For 9 years later, the atomic bombing, they were abandoned by the Japanese government and the United States as no medical care or assistance were extended to them. My mother died 14 years ago at the age of 89. She was in and out of hospital 28 times due to numerous illnesses, including stomach cancer and liver cancer. Before she died, I once recorded what she witnessed in writing, but she seemed quite dissatisfied with what she read. It was nothing like that. It was nothing like that, she said. And the rest of her word did not follow. That's it. she might have felt that no words or expressions could describe the hellish scenes she had witnessed. Other senior hibakusha might feel the same as she did. But now that 80 years have passed, the average age of survivors has reached 86. And we younger hibakusha, I'm 81 years old, the younger hibakusha, maybe youngest hibakusha, must succeed their work and speak out on their behalf. In the world today, the risk of nuclear weapons being used is considerable to the highest since the risk of the nuclear weapon being used is considered to be the highest since the end of the Cold War. What will happen to the Earth, the climate, and the human race if we engage in nuclear exchanges? Now is the time to think seriously about nuclear weapons and the global crisis. As citizens, we would like to strengthen out demand to the governments together. They must sign and ratify the TPNW. They should know that nuclear weapons, humanity, and the earth cannot coexist. Thank you very much. Thank you. And we need, Hidankyo got a letter from 8-year-old girl. And she said, I read in Japanese first, okay. Nihon Hidankyo様へ。
Dear Nihon Hidankyo,
私は子供で英語が喋れませんが、志はあります。
I'm a child, so I cannot speak English, but I have the will.
どうか私を核兵器禁止条約の会議に出してください。
Please kindly take me to the Treaty of the Prohibition Treaty of the Prohibition on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons Conference and attend.
私はなぜ核兵器を使うのか、どうして使うのかを知りたいです。
I want to know why people or countries use nuclear weapons and why.
そしてなぜ使ってはいけないかを言うこともできます。
I can say why we should not be using nuclear weapons.
私は歴史が好きで核兵器の歴史を知っています。
I like studying history and I know the history of nuclear weapons.
どうかお願いします。
So please do take me to the conference.
So, 8 years old girl, she knows why we can, no, okay. we cannot use the nuclear weapons, but Japanese government doesn't. right? So that's why they didn't come to the conference as even as an advisor. I mean observer. We are so sorry. We not sorry, but we are upset. We are angry. Yeah. So the President Ishiba-san. Hi. We had an interview. We had an interview with him. And he said, so the congratulations. And that was so significant matter. Thank you. He said, but nothing to do that. He doesn't, nothing. Okay, so we don't know the reason why the Japanese government denied the ratify. So sorry. So we have to work on the Nobel Peace Prize is not the goal, but that's our new start to work with people like you. Okay, and we have to spread out the universalization widely and highly. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening. Hi, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much once again, Masako-san. Thank you. We'll go now to our next speaker, Ajirem Saitnova. She's a human rights professional and nuclear justice advocate from Kazakhstan. She's the co-founder of the Kazakh Nuclear Frontline Coalition, an initiative that addresses the collective fight for justice for those affected by Soviet nuclear testing in her home region. Through intergenerational advocacy, the coalition works on both a global and national level to raise awareness and seek justice. Ajirem is a third-generation survivor of Soviet nuclear testing in Semipalatinsk, which profoundly shaped her activism. She's also a producer and the director of the documentary film Yara, you can correct me afterwards, Radioactive Patriarchy, Woman of Kazakhstan, which is going to be screened starting tomorrow at 10:30.
I'm sorry, but I have to play the heavy. The people here at Scandinavia House say we need to be out at 9:30. So I ask our speakers to be careful on time, and we'll
Yes.
move from there.
Thank you, Joseph. Yeah. Thank you, Ajirem.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick, but in those, now I will try to speak in 8 minutes, but I would like actually to have a moment of silence for, and I know everyone is tired, we don't have a lot of time, but after the statement that Wara-san just made, I think that we can honor all those people who suffer from the bomb. So if we take 15 seconds at least, and I'll be very happy. So yes, please. Thank you so much. My name is Ajirem Saitnova, and as Emily said, I am from Kazakhstan, and currently I represent Kazakh Nuclear Frontline Coalition, which I founded actually last year. But before that, I joined the field and in 2021, and I started to be more active through the Youth Fusion Abolition 2000s Youth Network back in 2022. And maybe it was a bit too late for me, but in 2018, I went to the test site for the first time, even though I'm from Semipalatinsk, formerly known as Semipalatinsk, which is a colonial name, and independently in my country right now called Simi. And I know that there are a couple of people who actually were there. So if you raise your hand when you went to my hometown in my country in the late 80s, early 90s, please. Okay, that's amazing. I'm very happy to see Yes. Thank you so much. And I really hope that others will join at some point. As Emily said, I'm a third generation survivor of Soviet nuclear testing. And back in 2018, I worked in human rights organization, and I honestly kind of had no idea why I need to join nuclear disarmament field. Like, why? Why do I need to do it? And we went to the field trip 120 kilometers from the place where I was born. And the reason why is that because mostly in my family, the topic was not discussed. My mom didn't really talk about it much. I lost my grandmother when I was 6, and she never saw me because she was blind. So me attending this conference and producing the film Jara, which means a wound from Kazakh language, I'm dedicating the whole week of 3MSP to her right now. And my mom never told me that so many of my family members actually passed away in their 50s and 60s from different types of cancer. She told me about the genetic disorder that she has, and that was passed on to me when I was 16, and I never knew why. And this, for so many years, for 40 years in Kazakhstan, there were more than 400 nuclear tests. And for me to have that number, to let that sink in, 456 officially known nuclear tests, out of which 116 are above the ground. And that number for me was, okay, I just need to, it's a lot. And so yeah, in 2018, I didn't want to do that. And in 2021, when I was doing my master's degree, I was writing about People's Tribunals, which is a civil society initiative. And when one of my friends reached out to me to invite to talk about nuclear testing in Kazakhstan, that's when everything just changed for me. And throughout the years, when I was in different disarmament spaces, I saw Kazakh delegation of diplomats, but I rarely saw young people from Kazakhstan or those who came without this very official government agenda. And I really wanted to have more critical approach, what is actually happening in my country, that first of all, Kazakhstan government is building an amazing foreign policy on nuclear disarmament, and I really acknowledge and appreciate that. But then when you go in my country as a community, you understand that there is so much to be done. And Kazakhstan is one of the countries that adopted the law to support those who were harmed by the nuclear tests 30 years ago, right? More than 30 years ago, 1992. So one of the countries that has, as we call it, victim assistance and this program, but this program doesn't really work that well. There's so many communities that are left out. Third and fourth generation were not even considered as those who suffer from nuclear tests. There are not social benefits. So when I created, together with my colleague here, Yerdaulet's Kazakh Nuclear Frontline Coalition, I was inspired first by the anti-nuclear movement, Nevada Semipalatinsk. And we got the blessing from our elders to, to continue pave by them the path that they created in the late 80s. And for us, it was really important to build this coalition on intergenerational, transnational, and intersectional solidarity. So we are presenting today, and one of the things that we did recently, starting from January, we wanted to have a needs assessment. What actually my community wants and needs at the moment. And more than 500 people responded to that survey that we distributed in Kazakh language, because a lot of information is in Russian, unfortunately, still. More than 30 years later, we're still using colonizing language. And we had the survey, we created it, and we distributed it, and 90% of people are saying that the government is not doing enough, that they need medical treatment, that they need better universal screening programs, that they need infrastructure, not from the late 90s, that I recently, unfortunately, spent some time in the hospital in my hometown, and I saw how everything is so outdated that I actually was afraid to be in the hospital. So we really need a lot of the things. And we need the government, and we need the government to have a political will to act. And one of the goals of our coalition is not only work globally and, to raise awareness about injustices happen to Kazakh people and my community, but also to create the awareness in the country, first of all, because we have lots of things to do to modernize the law and have a legal reform. And one of the recent cases of Constitutional Court of Kazakhstan actually was about nuclear test survivor who lives in a different region right now. He doesn't have any benefits because he moved from the region. So he's not considered to be, eligible for that. And he actually went to the Constitutional Court and saying that this is unconstitutional, that he can't do that. This is discriminatory. Unfortunately, the decision was not what we wanted, but the Constitutional Court recommended the legal reform. And not only that, there are so many other things that the government has to do. So we really hope for that. That's what we do nationally. And we're trying to connect this part on a national level. And I've recently become a part of intergovernmental working group with different ministries. And what I really realized that nobody knows what to do. I mean, they don't know about TPNW and other things, which is a really hard language to follow, right? But they don't know where to start, what to do, and how to engage communities. Ministry of Foreign Affairs and a lot of people who are present here from the official government agencies, they're trying to do a good job, but it's still very hard to have this approach. And with them, we're trying to break this kind of very much outdated system that was created before, right? For so many years of the, of our independence, which us young people, we don't want to take that in, and we really want to change that, but it's very hard. It's like going, I don't know, walking in a closed door that doesn't want to open. That's what Kazakh Nuclear Frontline Coalition is doing. And for us, first of all, it's all the fight for nuclear justice. It's a part of what we're doing now. And what I'm actually really happy about, and I'm going to be finishing now, is that when I started my journey, there were like maybe 2 or 3 young people in the field, but now we have around 10 or 15 actually of young delegates from different communities coming to 3MSP, and that we got funds to come here, and that we got the visa, because visa process is very humiliating to come to the US. But yeah, so if we work together, hopefully, and if you have any questions, I'll be very happy. The last thing I'll say, I have a screening tomorrow at 10:30 of the documentary at the Church Center. It will be a 1-hour event, which will be followed then by lunch. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and definitely do go to that screening. Our last speaker tonight is Sharon Dolev, who is a co-founder and executive director of the Middle East Treaty Organization and an Israeli campaigner for the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize winning International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. She's a peace and human rights activist with a focus on eradicating nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East through innovative policy, education, advocacy, and activism. She is the founder and director of the Israeli Disarmament Movement and a council member of the International Peace Bureau.
Thank you very much. I am for quite some time no longer with ICANN. I did start my activism when I was 14. As a peace and human rights activist. In 2000, that was 1984, I'm giving up my age. In 2007, I decided to start nuclear disarmament campaign. It was very weird to start campaigning on something that us Israelis are not supposed to talk or even think about. And that it seemed like there are many regulations and rules that say that ambiguity, opacity is by law. It took us a year to find out that the reason that we can't find exactly what will be the punishment for breaking the law is because there is no law. It's just a taboo. And if you didn't sign any of the, if you didn't work in Dimona, you actually can do a campaign against nuclear weapons in Israel. It doesn't mean that it's easy. At the beginning, every room that I entered or every event that we've done was filled with people that thought that the fact that I'm actually talking about nuclear weapons in Israel and not about the Iranian nuclear weapons that don't exist, but about the Israeli arsenal puts Israel into danger. The fact that I'm actually talking inside Israel about Israel's arsenal is putting Israel in danger. So the first thing was, how do we campaign against nuclear weapons in a state that believes that not talking about it keeping us safe, and that the only reason we exist is because of nuclear weapons? And I think that one of the things that worked for us were first to talk about it. The question was, do we fight ambiguity or do we ignore ambiguity? We ignored ambiguity. And by that we fought ambiguity. We started with a lot of NVDAs, nonviolent direct action. I think that the most significant one in November 2007 was when we decided to strip in front of the president of Israel. I'm looking at you so you'll get some ideas, right? Strip in front of the president of Israel, calling to strip the Middle East from weapons of mass destruction. That got us into the news. Yes, they ridiculed us, right? But they wanted to ask us questions and ridicule us, but it doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter what they ask. We learned from Netanyahu. It doesn't matter what they ask, you say what you came there to say. And I can say that by 2014, we already knew that we have a good campaign in Israel. In 2008, at my first NPT PrepCom, we heard the 100 Hiroshima story. What will happen if 100 bombs the size of Hiroshima will detonate? What you now know as the humanitarian campaign, humanitarian consequences of nuclear war. It was, the research was in its diapers, but already we had a group to test it, mayors, because in Israel there are 260 mayors. We already, before the NPT, sent all of them a letter on behalf of Mayors for Peace, and 4 have signed up. Coming back from the NPT, I tried the story that I heard about what will happen if there's even a limited war between India and Pakistan. What will that do? And I sent a letter to all the mayors in Israel with just 3 paragraphs on that, and 67 mayors out of 240 joined, including the mayor of Dimona, which was quite a shock for us. Or actually the reaction was, wow, pigs can fly. So what do you do when you have a good campaign, but it's not enough? In 2014, we started a series of roundtables inside Israel. It wasn't easy to get to talk to the same people that refused to talk to me or to let me into the room. And it's a long story. One day we'll have time. But what we found out from the 2014 till 2015 series of roundtables and meetings with Arab diplomats and even Iranian diplomats around the UN in closed doors was that actually there is no real obstacle for weapon of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East, apart from 2 main things. Nobody believes that it's possible, and nobody actually wants it to happen. I mean, they want to talk about it, they want to demand it, but they don't really want to push for it, right? But when we asked even experts to write some kind of an agreement that might work, the answer we got was it's impossible. Now, it's not, because in 2016, and I'm saying something now that I very hardly say. Usually I say we and experts. No, I wrote it. I didn't finish high school, but I wrote a draft treaty for a weapon of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East. The reason I'm saying it is because it wasn't that hard, okay? So how come there were experts meetings for 11 years and say that it's impossible to write this draft treaty? And the reason is that if you don't really believe that it's possible, you can't see the path. And here is where I'm asking you, who here believes that in our lifetime, and I have white hair now, in our lifetime, there will be a world without nuclear weapons. Who believes? If you don't believe it, you won't get it. Not enough to believe, you have to actually imagine it. The first thing I've done before writing the first draft treaty was to imagine the building that the states in the Middle East will join. What will be the patio where we can have cigarette breaks? That means that we're not leaving the building, but actually have conversations. What will be on the doors? What kind of departments? I actually imagined the building, and then I wrote the treaty, the draft treaty, and from that, we now have a fifth draft treaty, much, much better, because now we have people that actually understand something about something helping us. But in order to get the movement, we had to write something to show it to the government that hated it at the beginning. Do you remember, Rebecca, how much they hated it at the first meeting? They hated it. And the reason they hated it was because before showing them that, we sent it to all of the ministries in the Middle East by a British colleague, saying that this was written by a group of experts from the region and beyond, which, by the way, we still say, usually. That's what we were saying. The only reason I'm willing to say is because some of the diplomats from the Arab states actually pointed me, and now I feel free to say it. The reason I'm talking about it is because one of the main jobs for civil society is to remember that while diplomacy is a tool that we are using, we are not diplomats. And if we don't remember that, we won't have the power to change anything. We are not here to speak the language of diplomats. We are here to push diplomats. We are here to make sure that they see the path. And if it's a possibility, then they have to go there. They have an obligation. This is our responsibility as civil society, not to have ego. When I see, usually men write treaties thinking, and it goes from disarmament to now peace in the Middle East or peace between Israel and the Arab states. And I see men after men after men doing the same thing. They write a treaty and they think that the governments will just accept it. Now, no, governments do have ego. We as civil society can't afford to have ego, which is why the first words that we put on the first draft and now to the fifth draft is, this is a draft and a draft only. We're not married to any sentence. We made it an open source, take it, change it, whatever. But we presented the first draft in 2007 and in a series of side events at the UN. And at the end, by the end of 2018, there were already a resolution that passed in the same language that we used, calling for an annual conference that on a WMD free zone in the Middle East to reach a text freely arrived at, right? So basically, we managed to achieve something that most civil society could have dreamed of. The thing is that it's among Arab states, Iran, and Israel is not there yet. The funny thing, though, is that since 2019 until now, every meeting was ended with a document that, or an agreement by consensus. How many conferences at the UN, you know, that actually end every year with a consensus? The states in the room are working positively towards a weapon of mass destruction free zone. And the one thing that they are doing that we cannot commend them even, I mean, I don't know how to thank them every time, is that even though Israel is not in the room, they behave as if Israel is. So they know that they will not achieve anything if they'll write a new treaty that Israel can't join. They are preparing the ground for Israel to join. Now, one of the things, the name of the panel today is, if not now, when? And the question is not if not now, it's always now. We live in the now. Now it is our responsibility to make sure that Israel will be able to join, that the United States will come to the room. And there are ways to do it. We won't be able to bring more partners into this without compassion. Compassion is the first thing that civil society have to remember when wanting to solve a solution. Now, I'm Israeli. I'm very, very critical of my government. As some of you know, and as I said, I've been activist since 2014. I've been arrested over 40 times. The campaign in Israel and the campaign in the Middle East was almost never funded. So everything we do without funds. Everything we do is without salaries. All of us are volunteers. And yet we achieved that. The important thing is that now that we achieved this, just like the TPNW is an amazing milestone, it is, just like the November conference, a milestone. It is our job not to get married to the milestone, no matter how sexy it is. We still haven't disarmed one state. We still haven't got rid of one nuclear weapon. We need to keep our eyes on the ball. What we need to do is to now find, just like we in the Israel disarmament movement and then the Middle East Treaty Organization found a way for Israel to disarm safely, it is now our job to make sure that any of the nuclear armed states, any of the states that are covering under a nuclear umbrella, will have a soft landing, compassion. On one hand, we have to push them, but on the other hand, we have to make sure that it's possible for them to do so. The Middle East Treaty Organization has decided that once we have the weapon of mass destruction free zone talks every November, that this is a milestone. It means that we have to do everything in our powers to make sure that it's guarded, that other states, that in other resolutions are seeing that when it comes to the Middle East, there's already work being done. But it is also our job now to look at the next step, the conditions where this is possible. And the conditions are peace in the Middle East, right? And for that, the Middle East Treaty Organization, and pay attention, we didn't say which treaty, the Middle East Treaty Organization is starting now the second phase of our work, which is very, very exciting. We're taking all the SDGs, we're taking all the attempts for peace in the Middle East, and we're updating them for a series of regional treaties to show people in the Middle East that can't imagine peace, what peace might look like while we're pushing them for peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you to all our speakers. Really, I think I can say for everyone, we are really deeply grateful for all what you are doing in your local communities. And thank you again for taking the time to come here. And we know that this week's schedule is packed. I also know we have, 2 minutes left. So I don't really know if we should open for Q&A or not. Conversation? Okay, let's go for conversation while leaving. And please exchange contacts. That's the main important things. And feel free to come up also to us if you have more questions. And thank you once again for being here with us. Have a great evening. Thank you.